Welcome to Still Science Lab. Tonight, we are going to look down into the darkest, most expensive abyss humanity has ever constructed, and we are going to confront the terrifying reality of what we are actually doing in the dark. We are going to explore the unyielding mathematics and the deeply unsettling anomalies emerging from Switzerland, pointing toward a conclusion that shatters the boundaries of our everyday existence. CERN has discovered proof of hidden dimensions, and the catastrophic implication of this discovery is that we are fundamentally, structurally, not safe. We operate under the profoundly comforting delusion that our universe is a closed box, a secure, three-dimensional fortress protecting us from the infinite chaotic void. We believe that we are simply studying the laws of physics, gently peeling back the layers of nature to look at the gears ticking underneath. But this is an absolute, catastrophic lie. To understand the true nature of the cosmos, humanity has abandoned passive observation. We have chosen the path of extreme, unprecedented violence, and we are blindly assaulting the very foundation that keeps our reality intact. For centuries, science was a quiet, passive endeavor. We looked up at the stars through lenses of glass, silently mapping the majestic, predictable orbits of distant planets. We peered down through microscopes at the slow, biological machinery of cells. We thought of ourselves as silent observers, meticulously taking notes from the audience while the universe performed its grand, unbroken play on the stage. We equated the act of observation with safety, assuming that as long as we were merely looking, the universe would remain entirely indifferent to our presence. But modern particle physics is not astronomy. It is not biology. It is not passive. As we reached the absolute mathematical limits of what our eyes and our instruments could simply look at, we realized a frustrating truth. The fundamental building blocks of reality, the absolute bottom layer of existence, do not willingly reveal themselves to the observer. They are locked away, hidden behind immense, incomprehensible barriers of binding energy. To see what reality is actually made of, we had to stop looking and start breaking. We had to build a machine capable of generating a level of violence that has not existed naturally in our corner of the cosmos for 14 billion years. Deep beneath the border of France and Switzerland, buried 100 meters inside the bedrock of the Earth, sits a perfect ring of superconducting magnets spanning 27 kilometers in circumference. This is the Large Hadron Collider. It is, by every conceivable metric, the largest, most complex, and most expensive single machine our species has ever engineered. It is a sprawling subterranean cathedral of wires, liquid helium, and raw electromagnetic power. To keep the thousands of massive magnets functioning properly, the entire 27-kilometer ring must be cooled down to minus 271.3 degrees Celsius. That is a temperature colder than the empty vacuum of deep space. It is the coldest extended environment in the known universe, sitting completely silently beneath the quiet European countryside. But the chilling aspect of the Large Hadron Collider is not its massive size or its freezing temperature. It is the staggering, almost comical disproportion between the colossal scale of the instrument and the microscopic target it is designed to hunt. We have built a machine the size of a sprawling city just to look at something 1 billion times smaller than a single atom. We did not build this colossal subterranean ring to observe nature in its resting, peaceful state. We built it to forcefully drag the universe backward in time. Inside this freezing, airless vacuum tube, physicists inject two beams of protons, These are not just moving particles, they are subatomic projectiles. The machine powers up, and the superconducting magnets grip these protons, whipping them around the 27-kilometer track, accelerating them faster and faster, pushing them to the absolute, unforgiving edge of physical law. They are accelerated to 99.999991% of the speed of light. At this unimaginable velocity, the protons complete the 27-kilometer circuit 11,245 times every single second. They carry so much raw kinetic energy that if the beam were to stray by even a fraction of a millimeter, it would instantly melt through tons of solid metal machinery. And then, at 4 precise, heavily monitored intersection points, the beams are crossed. The protons are forcefully steered into a brutal head-on collision. They smash into each other with an impact so devastating, so hyper-concentrated, that the temperature at the exact microscopic point of collision spikes to levels roughly 100,000 times hotter than the center of the sundae. In that microscopic, fleeting fraction of a millisecond, the everyday, comfortable laws of physics completely melt away. The protons are utterly obliterated. Their fundamental constituents are ripped apart, and the raw, screaming energy of the impact temporarily tears a hole in the familiar fabric of our reality, recreating the exact, chaotic, searing conditions that existed just a fraction of a second after the Big Bang. We are not gently dissecting the atom with a scalpel. We are annihilating it with a sledgehammer to see what crawls out of the wreckage. We call this a physics experiment, carefully wrapping it in the sterile, academic language of data collection, standard deviations, and statistical analysis. But when you strip away the laboratory coats, the complex graphs, and the elegant equations, the horrifying truth of our methodology is laid completely bare. We have not built a microscope. We have built a 27-kilometer battering ram. We are using the most concentrated, violently energetic force humanity can physically muster to smash against the invisible, foundational walls of our own existence. And here is the deep, existential dread that permeates every single collision inside that machine. We are swinging this battering ram entirely in the dark. We are repeatedly, forcefully hitting the bedrock of reality, operating on the incredibly arrogant, completely untested assumption that the walls of our universe are actually thick enough to hold. We assume, based on nothing but our own desperate biological intuition, that the three-dimensional physical space we occupy is an impenetrable fortress, an absolute container that can withstand any amount of localized stress we decide to subject it to. The mathematics of general relativity and quantum mechanics never promised us a durable universe. Nowhere in the fundamental equations does it explicitly state that the fabric of space and time is immune to localized, artificial trauma. Yet, we are injecting energies that have not been seen since the violent, fiery birth of the cosmos into incredibly tiny, localized points in space. We are pounding on the floorboards of reality, waiting to see if anything echoes back from the other side. We are like children trapped inside a dark, locked room, discovering that if we throw a rock hard enough at the wall, we can hear a strange, hollow sound echoing from the other side. But instead of pausing to wonder what might reside in that vast, unknown, hollow space, we have decided to build a massive, automated cannon to shatter the plaster completely. The search for extra dimensions at CERN is not a philosophical metaphor, nor is it a fringe science fiction theory. It is a literal, desperate mathematical necessity driven by the fact that our current equations are failing us. Gravity is inexplicably weak. The masses of the particles do not make structural sense. The math relentlessly, undeniably points to the existence of higher geometries, hidden realms, curled-up dimensions existing right here, right now, hovering fractions of a millimeter away from our faces, completely invisible to our biological senses. And the only way the physicists at CERN know how to find them is to hit the boundary so incredibly hard that it cracks. They are looking for the exact moment when the energy of our collisions becomes too great for our fragile three-dimensional world to contain, forcing the energy to bleed out into the higher dimensions. They are actively, deliberately trying to breach the hull of our universe. We celebrate this monumental engineering achievement as the absolute pinnacle of human curiosity, completely ignoring the sheer, existential madness of the method itself. We are swinging a 27-kilometer hammer in the dark, hitting a dimensional wall we cannot even see, desperately hoping that whatever lives behind it does not decide to hit back. We have industrialized the process of attacking the fabric of reality, running billions of high-energy collisions every single second, day after day, year after year. We are relentlessly testing the structural integrity of existence itself, treating the cosmos like a crash test facility. And the truly terrifying part of this massive scientific endeavor is not just that we might eventually succeed in cracking the wall wide open. The terrifying part is that the anomalous data currently emerging from the detectors suggests that the wall is already leaking. There is an absolute, unyielding law of nature that forms the foundational bedrock of human sanity and the entire structure of classical physics. It is the law of the conservation of energy. From the moment we first began to rationally interrogate the physical world, we have relied on the deeply comforting mathematical guarantee that energy can never be created out of nothing, and it can never be completely destroyed. It can only change its form. When you strike a match, the chemical energy bound inside the wood does not vanish. It is violently converted into heat, light, and kinetic energy. When a star burns in the freezing vacuum of space, it is simply translating mass into radiation through the uncompromising equations of nuclear fusion. The universe, according to this sacred law, is a perfectly closed accounting system. It is the ultimate, flawless ledger where every single microscopic transaction must perfectly balance to the exact decimal point. We psychologically depend on this law because it provides us with the profound illusion of safety. It tells us that our three-dimensional reality is a sealed, inescapable vault. The walls are solid, the roof is closed, and whatever is inside this universe is permanently trapped here with us. We believe that we are contained. But the terrifying data emerging from the deepest subterranean laboratories on Earth mathematically suggests that our vault is not closed. It is porous. It is leaking. And the physicists at the Large Hadron Collider are actively, deliberately trying to force a piece of our universe to fall through the floorboards. To understand the sheer, paralyzing horror of this endeavor, you must first understand how the massive detectors at CERN actually function. The Atlas and CMS detectors are not merely giant cameras. They are the most ruthless, precise, and uncompromising accounting machines ever constructed by human intelligence. Built in massive underground caverns, these detectors are colossal, multi-layered spheres of silicon, liquid argon, and superconducting magnets. designed to completely surround the exact microscopic point where the proton beams collide. When the collision occurs, the two protons annihilate each other, and their combined kinetic energy violently blooms outward into a chaotic shower of subatomic debris. The detectors are engineered to catch absolutely everything. Every single photon, every electron, every quark that flies out of that microscopic fireball must pass through the layers of the detector, leaving a measurable electronic signature. The computers then perform a relentless calculation. They add up the energy and the momentum of every single piece of debris flying away from the crash. According to the sacred law of conservation, the total momentum of all the particles flying outward must exactly equal zero, because the original protons met head-on with equal and opposite force. The ledger must balance. What goes into the collision must exactly equal what comes out. But this is precisely where the nightmare of modern theoretical physics begins. The scientists at CERN are actively searching the data for the exact moment when the ledger fails to balance. They are hunting for collisions where the total energy and momentum recorded by the sensors simply do not add up. In the sterile, academic language of particle physics, this anomaly is referred to as missing transverse momentum. But when you strip away the sophisticated terminology, you are left with a concept of pure, unfiltered, existential dread. They are looking for an event where two protons smash together. A massive amount of energy is released, and a significant portion of that energy just completely disappears. It does not convert into heat. It does not convert into light. It does not register as a faint signal on a broken sensor. It physically, literally, vanishes from our observable reality. It simply ceases to exist within the known boundaries of the cosmos. How can a massive chunk of physical energy simply vanish without violating the most sacred law of physics? The theoretical answer is mathematically elegant and conceptually terrifying. The energy does not vanish into nothingness, it leaves. It steps out of our universe. According to the mathematics of string theory and multidimensional geometry, the incredibly violent, hyper-concentrated energy of the proton collision can forge a highly exotic, theoretical particle known as a graviton. The graviton is the hypothetical fundamental particle that carries the force of gravity. But unlike the electrons that make up your body, or the photons that carry the light into your eyes, the graviton is not strictly bound to the three-dimensional fabric of our reality. Theoretical physics dictates that while the forces of electromagnetism and the nuclear forces are permanently glued to our specific three-dimensional plane, gravity is untethered. The graviton is free to move across all possible dimensions. When the Large Hadron Collider successfully forces a graviton into existence, that particle does not simply fly outward through the silicon sensors of the detector. Instead, it absorbs a massive chunk of the collision's energy, exists for a fraction of a microscopic second in our world, and then it simply steps sideways. It slips out of our three-dimensional reality and falls into a fourth, fifth, or sixth spatial dimension. To the colossal electronic eyes of the Atlas detector, this event looks like an impossible, catastrophic deficit. The sensors measure the debris flying in one direction, but there is absolutely nothing flying in the opposite direction to balance the momentum. The energy is gone, but it is not destroyed. It has physically traveled into a geometric direction that we cannot point to, cannot move through, and cannot perceive. It has walked out an invisible door. The philosophical implication of this missing energy completely shatters the fragile illusion of human security. If an exotic particle can physically escape our universe, taking its energy with it, it proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that our reality is not a closed, safe system. The three-dimensional world we move through every single day, the world of up and down, left and right, forward and backward, is not the entirety of existence. It is merely a flat, incomplete slice of a much larger, darker, and vastly more complex multidimensional architecture. We are sitting inside a room, desperately believing that the walls are solid, while the mathematics of missing energy screams that the room is actually filled with invisible doors. There are exits all around us, hovering fractions of a millimeter away, layered over the air we breathe and the ground we walk on. We walk through our lives assuming that we are insulated from the absolute unknown by billions of light years of empty, three-dimensional space. We believe that if a threat exists, we will be able to see it approaching across the vast cosmic distance. But the concept of dimensional leakage mathematically proves that distance is a lie. If energy can bleed out of our universe into a higher dimension, it means the boundary between our reality and the dark, incomprehensible void of the bulk is unimaginably thin. We are not safely locked inside a cosmic vault. We are floating on a fragile, porous raft in the middle of a pitch-black, multi-dimensional ocean. We are completely, terrifyingly blind to the immense depth beneath us. We only know the ocean is there because if we hit the floor of our raft hard enough, we can physically watch our own pieces fall through the cracks and disappear into the water below. Ask yourself what it means to exist in an open system. If there are invisible doors allowing particles to bleed out into the dark, what is to stop the incomprehensible forces of the higher dimensions from bleeding in? The conservation of energy was our psychological shield. It was the absolute guarantee that the universe made rational, predictable sense. But by hunting for the missing transverse momentum, we are desperately trying to mathematically prove that our shield is an illusion. We are actively trying to confirm that our physical reality has holes in it. We are trying to prove that things can fall out of the universe. The scientists at CERN are sifting through petabytes of collision data, waiting for the shadow of the graviton. They are waiting for the exact, unambiguous signal of a massive energy deficit, the final mathematical proof that a piece of our world has successfully escaped into the hidden geometry of the cosmos. When they find it, it will be celebrated as the ultimate triumph of human intellect, the absolute confirmation of string theory and higher dimensions. It will earn Nobel Prizes and rewrite every textbook on the planet, but it will also be the final, irreversible death of human security. It will be the terrifying confirmation that the three dimensions we inhabit are not a sanctuary. We are not insulated. We are not protected. We are living inside a leaking vessel, completely at the mercy of a vast, unseen, multi-dimensional architecture that we can never touch, never map, and never escape. We are structurally vulnerable to the infinite dark, continuously bleeding our reality into a terrifying void we cannot even begin to comprehend. Humanity suffers from an incurable, terminal case of cosmic arrogance. We have spent centuries gradually, painfully stepping down from the center of the universe. We were forced to accept that the Earth is not the center of the solar system, that our sun is not the center of the galaxy, and that the Milky Way is merely an insignificant speck adrift in a sea of billions of other galaxies. But even as we accepted our physical insignificance, we desperately clung to a much deeper, more fundamental psychological comfort. We believed that the three-dimensional space we inhabit, the vast expanse of up, down, left, right, forward, and backward, constituted the absolute totality of existence. We look up at the night sky, gaze into the freezing, seemingly infinite void, and arrogantly assume that we are looking at the entire container of reality. We believe that if we build a telescope powerful enough, we can see everything there is to see. We believe that our universe is all that is. But the unforgiving mathematics of modern theoretical physics, specifically the sprawling hyperdimensional architecture of string theory, suggests that our entire reality is nothing more than a microscopic, flat illusion floating in a terrifyingly vast, incomprehensible dark. This brings us to the agonizing concept of Brane cosmology. To solve the catastrophic mathematical contradictions between quantum mechanics and the force of gravity, theoretical physicists were forced to add more dimensions to their equations. The universe could not simply be three-dimensional. The math strictly demanded higher spatial dimensions to properly balance the fundamental forces. Out of these sprawling, complex equations emerged a picture of reality so profoundly claustrophobic that it violently shatters our perception of freedom. The mathematics dictates that our entire universe, the 14 billion light-year expanse of galaxies, stars, planets, and empty vacuum, is not a grand, encompassing volume. It is a membrane, a lower dimensional slice of geometry. In the sterile language of physics, it is called a brane. Our three-dimensional universe is just a singular, infinitely thin, flat brane floating inside a much larger, unimaginably colossal, higher-dimensional hyperspace. Physicists refer to this vast, surrounding void simply as the bulk. We are not the room. We are merely a single sheet of paper suspended in the center of an infinite, pitch-black cathedral. And here is the specific, mechanical nightmare of our existence. You might intuitively ask, if there is a massive, higher dimensional room surrounding our universe, why cannot we see it? Why cannot we just build a rocket ship, turn it perpendicular to our reality, and fly out into the bulk? The answer lies in the fundamental nature of the particles that make up your body. In string theory, the elementary particles, the quarks inside your protons, the electrons firing in your nervous system, and most importantly, the photons of light that allow you to see, are modeled as incredibly tiny, vibrating strings. But they are not closed loops. They are open-ended strings. And the uncompromising mathematical rules of this framework dictate that the ends of every single open string must be permanently affixed to a brane. You are physically, mathematically glued to the surface of our universe. The fundamental forces of electromagnetism and the nuclear forces that bind your atomic structure together are completely restricted to the three dimensions of our brane. You can move freely along the surface of the membrane. You can walk across a room, you can fly an airplane, you can launch a probe to the outer edges of the solar system, but you are merely sliding across the flat face of the architecture. You can never, ever lift off. We are exactly like microscopic insects trapped on a piece of cosmic flypaper. The insect can crawl endlessly left and right, forward and backward along the sticky surface, living its entire life under the absolute, unquestioning delusion that the flat, two-dimensional paper is the absolute totality of reality. It lacks the sensory apparatus, the physical capacity, and the geometric vocabulary to comprehend the three-dimensional room it is actually sitting inside. We are those insects. The three dimensions we move through are simply the directions we are allowed to slide. We are permanently imprisoned on the surface of reality, mistaking the walls of our cell for the entirety of existence. This structural imprisonment guarantees our absolute terminal blindness, because photons, the particles of light, are also open-ended strings glued to the brain. Light cannot travel through the bulk. It can only propagate along the surface of our membrane. This means that every telescope we have ever built, from the Hubble to the James Webb, is fundamentally useless for seeing the true volume of reality. They are merely scraping the surface of the flypaper. When we look out into the deepest reaches of space, we are not looking into the void. We are just looking further down the flat wall of our prison. The true volume of reality, the colossal, higher dimensional bulk that surrounds us, is completely unlit. It is a realm of absolute, unbreakable darkness. There is an entire multidimensional volume of existence hovering right next to us, separated by a geometric direction we cannot point to, perhaps fractions of a millimeter away, and we are physically incapable of ever looking at it. We must violently confront the agonizing vulnerability of this situation. If we are merely a flat surface floating in a higher dimensional space, what else is in the bulk? The mathematics does not demand that the bulk be empty. In fact, it suggests the exact opposite. The bulk could be teeming with incomprehensible, hyperdimensional structures, vast gravitational currents, and massive, wandering anomalies that move through the true volume of reality. Because these structures exist outside our brain, they would not emit light that our eyes could see, and they would not be made of matter that our hands could touch. Massive, terrifying entities could be drifting through the bulk, passing directly through the physical space you are occupying right now, and you would be entirely oblivious to their presence. You are sitting in the dark, permanently paralyzed on a sticky surface, completely exposed to whatever vast, unfeeling forces are moving in the room around you. We draw profound psychological comfort from the illusion of cosmic isolation. We look at the empty space between the stars and feel safe, assuming that any threat to our existence would have to cross billions of light years of empty, three-dimensional space to reach us. We believe we have an early warning system. We track asteroids. We monitor solar flares. We guard the perimeter of our three-dimensional borders. But Brane cosmology obliterates this comfort. It leaves our multidimensional flank completely, utterly exposed. A catastrophic event, a massive hyperdimensional collision, or a roaming gravitational anomaly could originate in the bulk and move directly toward the face of our brain. Because it approaches from a higher dimension, no light would precede it. There would be no warning, no gradual approach, no signal our instruments could possibly detect. One moment we would be staring into the seemingly empty, peaceful cosmos, and the next millisecond, the incredibly fragile fabric of our brain could be violently shredded by an unseen force crashing into us from a geometric direction we literally do not possess the capacity to imagine. This is the terrifying context in which the Large Hadron Collider operates. The scientists at CERN are not just exploring the intricate details of our three-dimensional prison. They are actively trying to interact with the void outside it. By smashing protons together at unimaginable, unprecedented energies, they are attempting to generate vibrations so intense that they ripple the very fabric of our brain. They are deliberately shaking the flypaper. They are desperately trying to forge closed-string particles, the only entities theoretically capable of detaching from the glue and escaping into the bulk. They want to measure the energy bleeding off the membrane to mathematically prove the existence of the dark room surrounding us. We are trapped, blind, and defenseless, and our brightest minds have decided that the best course of action is to relentlessly pound on the floorboards of our cell, hoping to map the exact contours of our isolation. We are making violent, chaotic noise in the absolute dark, completely ignoring the horrifying possibility that there might be something vast and incomprehensible lurking in the bulk, silently feeling the vibrations of our brain and waiting for us to finally break through. We walk across the surface of this planet entirely possessed by the comforting, unquestioned delusion that gravity is the supreme, governing force of physical reality. We look at the architectural majesty of our cities. We watch massive oceans rhythmically pulled by the moon. We observe the brutal, crushing majesty of black holes. And we biologically assume that gravity is the absolute master of the cosmos. We feel its constant, unyielding downward pull on our bones every single second of our lives, and we interpret this relentless pressure as the ultimate expression of cosmic authority. We believe that gravity is the strong, indestructible tether holding the universe together, but we are fundamentally misinterpreting the nature of the force that keeps us from floating into the freezing void. The mathematics of theoretical physics reveals a truth that is deeply, existentially humiliating. Gravity is not the master of the universe. It is a pathetic, fragile ghost. It is, by a staggering, almost incomprehensible margin, the weakest force in nature, and the reason for its weakness threatens to completely unravel the illusion of our safety. To understand the sheer, paralyzing absurdity of this, you only need to perform a simple, everyday action. Pick up a standard, metal paperclip. Hold it in the palm of your hand. Beneath your feet is the entire mass of the Earth. 6 septillion kilograms of iron, rock, and molten magma, a planetary sphere nearly 13,000 kilometers across, all working in absolute unison, pulling down on that tiny piece of metal with the combined gravitational authority of an entire world. Now, take a small, cheap refrigerator magnet, the kind you buy in a souvenir shop, and hold it an inch above the paperclip. The paperclip instantly leaps upward, slamming into the magnet. You have just witnessed a microscopic fraction of electromagnetic force completely and effortlessly overpower the entire gravitational pull of a celestial body. This is not a slight discrepancy. It is not a minor statistical anomaly. The gap between the strength of electromagnetism and the strength of gravity is mathematically paralyzing. Gravity is roughly 10 to the power of 38 times weaker than electromagnetism. That is a 1 followed by 38 zeros. It is a discrepancy so vast, so structurally absurd, that it completely breaks the foundational logic of the standard model. Physics calls this the hierarchy problem. It is an open, bleeding wound in our understanding of reality, screaming that our universe is incorrectly tuned, that the forces dictating our existence are catastrophically mismatched, and that we are completely, terrifyingly blind to the reason why. For decades, theoretical physicists stared at this impossible number, desperately trying to find a mathematical mechanism within our three-dimensional reality that could explain why gravity is so unfathomably diluted. They sought a hidden symmetry, a missing particle, any rational explanation that could balance the cosmic ledger without requiring us to abandon our intuition. they found absolutely nothing. The standard rules of quantum mechanics and relativity offer no sanctuary, no elegant balancing act. The answer, when it finally emerged from the sprawling, hyperdimensional architecture of string theory, was not a comforting mathematical trick. It was a spatial nightmare. The solution requires us to return to the terrifying concept of the brain, the infinitely thin, flat membrane of three-dimensional space that we are permanently glued to. As we established, the particles that make up your body, the light hitting your eyes, and the forces of electromagnetism are open-ended strings, physically trapped on the surface of our universe. They are completely contained within the flat plane of our existence. Because their energy is strictly confined to our three dimensions, it cannot spread out, it cannot escape, and therefore we feel the full, undiluted fury of their strength. But gravity operates under an entirely different, vastly more disturbing set of geometric rules. In the mathematical framework of string theory, the force of gravity is carried by a hypothetical fundamental particle called the graviton. But unlike every other building block of our reality, the graviton is not an open string. It is a closed loop. It has no ends to glue to the flypaper of our brain. And because its geometry is perfectly closed, it is completely free to move. Gravity is not bound to our universe. It is the only force capable of slipping off the membrane and expanding outward into the terrifying, pitch-black volume of the higher dimensional bulk. This completely, violently reframes the nature of the hierarchy anomaly. Gravity is not inherently weak. At its core, at its true multidimensional source, gravity is just as violently powerful, just as absolute and crushing as electromagnetism or the strong nuclear force. It is only weak to us because we are not experiencing the entirety of the force. We are only feeling the microscopic fraction of gravity that happens to intersect with our incredibly thin slice of reality. The vast, overwhelming majority of gravity's true strength is constantly leaking out, diluting itself across the immense, hidden dimensions that we can never see and never measure. We must violently confront the psychological horror of what this actually means for our daily existence. The force that grounds you, the invisible tether that pulls your feet to the floor and prevents the atmosphere from violently boiling off into the vacuum of space, is a spatial illusion. It is a phantom limb. You are not feeling the firm, protective grip of a native planetary force. You are feeling a leak. You are feeling the diluted, bleeding shadow of a much more terrifying reality that exists entirely outside our physical reach. Gravity is an alien intruder, a higher dimensional phenomenon casually brushing against the flat surface of our world as it propagates through the dark volume of the bulk. We mistakenly believe that gravity belongs to us, that it is a fundamental property of our three-dimensional universe, generated by our planets and our stars. But we are merely capturing the geometric scraps of a hyperdimensional storm. The true engine of gravity sits outside our universe, projecting a faint, ghostly shadow onto our walls, and we have spent the entirety of human history mistaking that shadow for the absolute truth. Ask yourself what it means that the most ubiquitous, defining physical experience of our world, the simple act of falling, is actually a brief interaction with the unlit void we cannot access. If gravity is free to move through the higher dimensions, then the gravitational waves we detect might not just be coming from the collision of black holes within our own universe. What massive, incomprehensible structures are moving through the bulk right now, generating gravitational currents that wash over our fragile brain like unseen ripples across a dark pond. We are clinging to a rock, hurtling through a blind cosmos, held in place by a force that is actively, continuously bleeding away into unseen geometries. The grounding, solid reality of the earth beneath your feet is a mathematical deception. You are not safely anchored to the floor. You are suspended over an infinite multidimensional drop, desperately trusting your survival to a weak, fading echo from the dark. We are completely oblivious to the deafening roar of the true universe operating just millimeters away from our blind, desperate faces, existing entirely at the mercy of a force that is quietly abandoning our reality every single second. We possess a deeply ingrained, almost pathological attachment to the physical substance of our own bodies. We look down at our hands, we feel the solid weight of our bones, and we intuitively assume that the matter comprising our physical form is absolute, definitive, and unique. We believe that an electron is simply an electron. We believe that a quark is just a quark. We are taught to view the periodic table of elements and the standard model of particle physics as the ultimate, exhaustive catalogue of reality's building blocks. We draw profound psychological comfort from this finite inventory, believing that we are constructed from the premium, fundamental clay of the cosmos. We assume that the physical stuff we are made of is the only version of matter that nature ever intended to forge. But the relentless, unyielding mathematics of higher dimensional geometry suggests a physical reality that is deeply, existentially humiliating. The terrifying truth emerging from the theoretical frameworks guiding the Large Hadron Collider is that the particles making up your body, the atoms of the air you breathe, and the photons of light striking your retina are not unique. They are not the absolute, definitive version of reality. They are merely the cheapest, most exhausted, lowest energy shadows of a much larger, infinitely more terrifying, multidimensional hierarchy. To comprehend the sheer horror of this layered reality, we must look back to a mathematical proposition made in the 1920s, long before the first particle accelerators were even drawn on paper. A mathematician named Theodore Kaluza and a physicist named Oscar Klein were desperately trying to solve the greatest structural anomaly in physics, the unification of gravity and electromagnetism. They realized that these two fundamentally different forces could be mathematically merged into a single, beautiful, overarching theory, but only if they introduced a completely radical, unproven concept. They had to mathematically force the universe to contain a fifth dimension. However, to explain why we cannot see or move through this fifth dimension, Klein proposed that it was not vast and expansive like the three dimensions we know. Instead, he theorized that this extra dimension is curled up into an unimaginably microscopic loop, a tiny circle billions of times smaller than a single atom, existing at every single point in our visible space. This elegant mathematical trick successfully unified the forces on paper, but it introduced a catastrophic physical consequence that continues to haunt theoretical physics to this day. If a hidden, curled-up dimension actually exists at every point in space, then the fundamental particles of our universe, the electrons and the quarks, must be able to interact with it. According to the strict rules of quantum mechanics, a particle behaves both as a solid point and as a vibrating wave. If there is a tiny hidden geometric loop right next to an electron, the quantum wave of that electron can wrap around that hidden loop and begin to vibrate. Think of a guitar string. When you pluck it gently, it vibrates at its lowest, most fundamental frequency, producing a single, clear note. But if you inject more energy, if you pluck it harder, the string can vibrate in more complex patterns, producing higher pitches known as harmonics or overtones. In the terrifying framework of multidimensional physics, this exact same principle applies to the fundamental fabric of matter. The electron that orbits the nucleus of an atom in your body is exactly like the guitar string vibrating at its absolute lowest, most fundamental frequency. It is the lowest possible energy state of that specific quantum wave. But if you were to inject a massive amount of energy into that electron, you could theoretically force it to vibrate around the curled up, hidden fifth dimension. You could force it to ring at a higher harmonic. When a particle vibrates in a higher dimension, something incredibly strange and profoundly disturbing happens to its physical appearance in our three-dimensional world. We cannot see the hidden dimension, and we cannot see the microscopic vibration. But in physics, the momentum of a particle moving through a hidden dimension translates directly into mass in our visible reality. The faster the particle spins around the microscopic, invisible loop, the heavier it physically appears to us. Therefore, an electron vibrating in a higher dimension would still possess the exact same electrical charge as a normal electron. It would still possess the exact same quantum spin. To our instruments, it would look exactly like an electron, but it would be unfathomably, violently heavier. These heavier, high-energy harmonics of our fundamental particles are known in theoretical physics as Kaluza-Klein states, or KK particles, and their existence implies a horrifying, tiered architecture to existence. For every single particle that you know, for every electron, for every quark, for every photon of light, the mathematics of hidden dimensions dictates that there must exist a heavier, unstable ghost copy of that exact same particle. There is a heavy KK electron, there is a heavy KK quark, there is a heavy KK photon. They are the exact same fundamental entity, simply vibrating at a higher pitch in a geometric direction we cannot perceive. This is not an abstract, philosophical thought experiment. This is a highly specific, mathematically rigorous prediction, and it is exactly what the massive subterranean detectors at CERN are actively hunting for right now. The scientists operating the Large Hadron Collider are not just smashing protons together to watch them break. They are deliberately trying to inject such an obscene, concentrated amount of raw kinetic energy into the subatomic wreckage that they literally force the resulting particles to vibrate into the hidden dimensions. They are trying to ring the multidimensional bell. They are desperately trying to forge Kaluza-Klein particles in the blazing epicenter of the collision. Because these KK ghosts are so incredibly massive, they are violently unstable. The moment a heavy KK particle is forged in the collision, it wants to instantly return to its lowest energy state. Within a microscopic fraction of a millisecond, the heavy ghost particle stops vibrating in the higher dimension, collapsing back into a normal, standard model particle, and violently unleashing all of its excess mass as a massive burst of secondary radiation. The ATLAS and CMS detectors at CERN are meticulously programmed to search the petabytes of collision data for this exact unambiguous signature. They are looking for the precise moment when a heavy, impossible ghost suddenly materializes, decays, and spits out a signature of energy that perfectly matches the mathematical prediction of a higher dimensional harmonic. If they find it, it will be the absolute, undeniable smoking gun. It will be the final, physical proof that hidden dimensions are real, that the Kaluza-Klein geometry is correct, and that the universe possesses a hidden, invisible volume. But if CERN finds a Kaluza-Klein particle, the existential dread that follows will be absolute and irreversible. We will be forced to violently reevaluate our own position in the cosmic hierarchy. We walk through our lives believing that the matter comprising our reality is the primary, definitive substance of the universe. We view our bodies, our planets, and our stars as the ultimate expression of physical existence. But the reality of Kaluza-Klein states proves that we are entirely wrong. We are not the primary substance. We are the leftovers. In the language of physics, the universe inherently seeks the lowest possible energy state. Over the 14 billion years since the Big Bang, all the massive, violent, high-energy KK particles that may have been forged in the primordial fire have long since decayed, collapsing down the multi-dimensional ladder, shedding their energy until they finally settled into the absolute bottom rung. The normal electrons, the normal quarks, the normal photons that make up our entire visible universe are just the exhausted, ground state residue of a much more vibrant, higher dimensional reality. Ask yourself what it means to be constructed entirely out of cosmic sediment. The fundamental building blocks of your nervous system, the atoms in your heart, and the molecules of the ground beneath your feet are merely the cheapest, lowest energy versions of reality mathematically allowed to exist. We are the discount physical state. We are trapped in a bleak, low-energy basement, completely oblivious to the towering energetic architecture layered directly on top of us. We are surrounded by the invisible, mathematical potential for these heavier ghosts. The hidden dimensions are sitting right next to you, curling around every single atom in your body, containing the exact geometric space required to forge a terrifyingly heavy, violently unstable copy of yourself. We look in the mirror and believe we are seeing the definitive reality. But Brane cosmology and the Kaluza-Klein echoes whisper a much darker truth. The reality you experience is just the flat, exhausted shadow of a higher dimensional storm. You are just a low-frequency vibration, desperately clinging to a fragile membrane in the dark, entirely unaware of the massive, terrifying overtones waiting to be awakened in the hidden geometry right next to your skin. When CERN finally hits the dimensional wall hard enough to summon one of these heavy ghosts, it will not just prove the existence of higher space. It will prove definitively that we are nothing more than the cheap, silent, flat residue of a universe we are too weak to truly inhabit. We navigate our lives entirely dependent on the profound, unquestioned assumption that space is an empty, passive container. We intuitively view the physical world as a blank, three-dimensional canvas, perfectly smooth and continuous, stretching infinitely in all directions to accommodate the matter that exists within it. When you wave your hand through the air, you believe you are moving through a featureless void, a mathematically simple geometry of height, width, and depth. We desperately need to believe that space itself is nothing more than the quiet, stable theater in which the dramatic events of the cosmos unfold. This intuition is a necessary biological survival mechanism. If our sensory apparatus were somehow capable of perceiving the true, underlying architectural texture of the space we are walking through every single second, our fragile human minds would instantly collapse under the sheer, incomprehensible horror of its complexity. The unyielding mathematics of modern theoretical physics dictates that space is not empty. It is not flat. It is not smooth, and it is certainly not passive. The very fabric of reality is an unfathomably intricate, violently knotted labyrinth, and the machines we have built to study it are currently pushing that fragile geometry to the absolute breaking point. To comprehend the terrifying reality of what we are actually doing to the fabric of space, we must first look at the unforgiving geometric demands of string theory. In order for the mathematics of the universe to function, in order to balance the equations governing the delicate dance of quantum mechanics and the crushing weight of gravity, the universe absolutely requires more than 3 spatial dimensions. The mathematics strictly demands 10 or even 11 dimensions to work. This is not a philosophical suggestion, it is a rigid structural requirement. But we only see 3. To explain the agonizing absence of these extra spatial directions, theoretical physicists did not discard the theory. Instead, they realized that the missing dimensions must be hidden, crushed down into a state of permanent, microscopic confinement. They proposed that these extra dimensions are curled up, folded in upon themselves so tightly that they become physically imperceptible. This theoretical concept was mathematically formalized into a shape known as a Calabi-Yau manifold. You must strip away the sterile, academic safety of that term and visualize what it actually represents. A Calabi-Yau manifold is an insanely complex, 6-dimensional geometric shape, a microscopic knot of spatial dimensions folded in upon themselves in tens of thousands of overlapping, intersecting ways. And here is the fact that should shatter your perception of your own physical surroundings. These terrifying, incomprehensible shapes do not just exist in some abstract mathematical void, they exist everywhere. At every single microscopic point in the space you are currently occupying, hovering directly in front of your eyes, passing through the atoms of your own body, there is a 6-dimensional Calabi-Yau manifold tightly wound up and vibrating in the dark. The scale of this confinement is almost impossible for the human brain to process. These extra dimensions are crushed down to the Planck length, a distance so incomprehensibly small that if you were to magnify a single atom to the size of the entire observable universe, the Planck length would be roughly the size of a standard tree. At this absolute, foundational baseline of existence, the fabric of space is not a smooth sheet of silk. It is a violently churning, turbulent ocean of tightly wound, 6-dimensional knots. These dimensions have been permanently sealed, crushed by the extreme, unimaginable tension of the universe itself, locked away since the very first microsecond of the Big Bang. They were never meant to be opened. They are the suppressed, hidden architecture that allows our 3-dimensional illusion to remain stable. This is the terrifying context in which the Large Hadron Collider operates. We operate under the delusion that CERN is merely a machine designed to smash particles, to break protons apart and catalog the subatomic debris. We view it as a highly sophisticated sledgehammer, dissecting the building blocks of matter, but we are catastrophically ignoring the most fundamental rule of Albert Einstein's general relativity. Mass and energy are the exact same thing, and energy directly warps the geometry of space. When the superconducting magnets at CERN accelerate 2 beams of protons to 99.9999991% of the speed of light and force them to collide, They are doing something far more violent than just breaking atoms. They are concentrating an unprecedented, obscene amount of raw kinetic energy into an infinitesimally small microscopic point. The energy density at the exact epicenter of that collision briefly rivals the searing, chaotic conditions of the primordial universe. When you inject that much raw, screaming energy into a singular microscopic point, that energy does not simply dissipate smoothly into the surrounding vacuum. It interacts directly with the spatial fabric itself. It interacts with the incredibly tight, violently confined geometry of the Calabi-Yau manifolds residing at that exact coordinate. Physicists know that the extra dimensions are held in their microscopic, curled-up state by a specific physical tension. But what happens when the localized energy of a collision violently exceeds that tension? What happens when you pump the concentrated fury of a primordial fireball directly into a spatial knot that has been held tightly shut for 14 billion years? The mathematics points toward a theoretical consequence of pure, unfiltered, existential dread. If the energy is high enough, it could theoretically force the curled-up dimension to temporarily inflate. It could cause the Calabi-Yau manifold to expand. In the language of theoretical physics, this is known as unfolding. The incredibly complex, six-dimensional geometry, forced open by the staggering kinetic impact of the colliding protons, would violently uncoil, attempting to stretch its hidden spatial directions out into our visible reality. We are not just breaking matter. We are applying extreme, localized stress to the microscopic stitches of space and time. We are forcing a rolled-up, crushed dimension to physically open its jaws inside our three-dimensional world. We must violently confront the absolute, paralyzing blindness of this endeavor. We have absolutely no idea what happens when you force a hidden dimension to unfold. We possess no experimental data, no historical precedent, and no comprehensive mathematical guarantee that explains the macroscopic consequences of tearing open the foundational geometry of the cosmos. Theoretical physicists can write equations describing the initial expansion, but the physical reality of a six-dimensional space forcefully intruding upon our three-dimensional brain is a complete and utter unknown. By injecting this much energy into the spatial fabric, we risk creating microscopic tears in the geometry of the universe. We are forcefully expanding structures that were intentionally suppressed by the evolutionary dynamics of the early cosmos. We assume, with the same terminal arrogance that defines all human scientific pursuit, that if we force a microscopic dimension to unfold, it will simply snap back shut the moment the energy dissipates. We assume the spatial fabric is elastic, capable of absorbing our violent, localized trauma and instantly returning to its smooth, comforting baseline. But what if it is not elastic? What if the geometry of the universe behaves more like glass than rubber? What if forcing a Calabi-Yau manifold to expand creates a permanent, microscopic fracture in the local fabric of reality? A tiny, invisible tear where the laws of three-dimensional physics completely break down. A localized spatial anomaly where the fundamental forces of nature bleed into the six unfolded directions, creating a chaotic, unpredictable rupture right here on Earth. Even more terrifying is the possibility that unfolding a dimension could act as a geometric catalyst. If one Calabi-Yau manifold is forced open, the sudden, violent release of its internal tension could destabilize the adjacent spatial knots, triggering a cascading, runaway chain reaction of unfolding dimensions. We are playing with the absolute most dangerous, volatile parameters of existence, blindly manipulating the foundational blueprint of the universe. We are prying open a sealed door without possessing the slightest comprehension of what breathes on the other side, and without knowing if we possess the physical strength to close it once it has been opened. We celebrate the Large Hadron Collider as the ultimate triumph of human curiosity, completely ignoring the fact that we are systematically, continuously traumatizing the geometry of the void. We are not explorers, shining a light into the dark. We are vandals, violently picking at the foundational seams of our reality, deliberately injecting explosive energy into the hidden, coiled architecture of space. We are risking the structural integrity of the cosmos simply to satisfy our own mathematical curiosity, entirely blind to the catastrophic horror that awaits us if the fabric of our universe finally decides to unravel. We harbor a deeply ingrained, immensely comforting psychological illusion about the scale of cosmic destruction. We look up at the night sky and observe the violent death of stars, the crushing, inescapable jaws of supermassive black holes devouring entire solar systems, and we feel a profound sense of safety simply because those cosmic monsters reside billions of light years away in the freezing void. We biologically need to believe that absolute annihilation is a macroscopic phenomenon, restricted entirely to the colossal weights of collapsing suns and the immense gravitational centers of distant galaxies. We think of black holes as the apex predators of the deep cosmos, entities wholly divorced from the fragile, microscopic building blocks of our daily existence. But this macroscopic comfort is a severe, potentially fatal misunderstanding of the physics we are currently manipulating. The unyielding mathematics of higher dimensional geometry suggests that the ultimate, devouring horror of the cosmos does not require the death of a massive star. It only requires a microscopic point of unimaginable energy, and the terrifying reality is that we are deliberately engineering the exact mathematical conditions required to summon that horror right here on Earth. To understand how a machine built by human hands could theoretically manufacture the ultimate cosmic anomaly, we must return to the agonizing mystery of gravity's weakness. In our standard, three-dimensional worldview, gravity is an incredibly pathetic, diluted force. If you smash two standard protons together, the gravitational attraction between them is so ridiculously small that it is entirely mathematically negligible. According to classical physics, you could never pack enough mass into a small enough space using a particle accelerator to create a singularity. The outward explosive forces of the subatomic collision would always violently overwhelm the incredibly weak gravitational pull trying to collapse the matter inward. But the desperate search for hidden dimensions completely obliterates this comforting classical limit. If the universe actually possesses curled-up, extra-spatial dimensions, then our entire understanding of gravitational geometry is fundamentally flawed. As the mathematics of Brane cosmology suggests, gravity is only weak because it leaks out into the higher dimensional void. But at the incredibly microscopic scale, at distances smaller than the size of the extra dimensions themselves, gravity has not yet had the chance to dilute. At the absolute foundational, subatomic level of the universe, gravity is exponentially, violently stronger than we perceive it to be. This brings us directly to the apocalyptic threshold of the Large Hadron Collider. When the superconducting magnets accelerate protons to 99.999999% of the speed of light and force them into a brutal head-on collision, they are not just breaking matter apart to see what falls out. They are packing an obscene amount of raw, screaming kinetic energy into an infinitesimally small volume of space. If extra dimensions exist, and if gravity is exponentially magnified at that exact microscopic scale, the localized gravitational force at the epicenter of the crash spikes to an unimaginable extreme. The energy of the collision becomes so incredibly dense that the amplified, higher dimensional gravitational pull overwhelms all other fundamental forces of nature. The subatomic wreckage cannot escape its own concentrated weight. The fabric of space completely collapses inward, pinching off from the surrounding universe, and a microscopic event horizon is born. The Large Hadron Collider would successfully manufacture a black hole. We are not talking about a philosophical metaphor, a dark analogy, or a theoretical curiosity. We are talking about a literal physical singularity, an absolute tear in the geometric fabric of space and time, generated 100 meters beneath the European countryside. It would possess the exact same fundamental, devouring properties as the stellar behemoths lurking in the dark voids of space, simply scaled down to a subatomic proportion. The instant the event horizon forms, a piece of our universe is permanently severed, creating a one-way cosmic threshold from which no light, no information, and no physical matter can ever return. By deliberately probing the high-energy limits of multidimensional geometry, we are willingly walking right up to the edge of the absolute darkest phenomenon in the cosmos, actively trying to spark the very engine of universal destruction inside our own fragile planetary habitat. Naturally, the scientific establishment recognized this terrifying possibility long before the machine was ever turned on, and they offered the world an absolute, unwavering assurance of our safety. The physicists at CERN confidently assure us that even if the Large Hadron Collider successfully manufactures microscopic black holes billions of times a second, there is absolutely no reason to panic. Their confidence rests entirely on the theoretical work of the late Stephen Hawking. According to the complex mathematics bridging quantum mechanics and thermodynamics, black holes are not completely black. They constantly emit a faint trickle of thermal energy known as Hawking radiation. As a black hole radiates this thermal energy, it slowly loses mass, and as it loses mass, it shrinks. The mathematics explicitly dictates that the smaller a black hole is, the faster it evaporates. Therefore, a black hole created in a subatomic collision would be so unimaginably tiny and so incredibly hot that it would evaporate in a microscopic fraction of a millisecond. It would vanish in a burst of harmless, secondary radiation long before it could ever interact with the surrounding matter, long before it could swallow a single electron or consume a single atom of the machine that birthed it. The public eagerly accepted this elegant mathematical reassurance, viewing it as the definitive proof that the scientific establishment was in absolute, rational control of their massive subterranean experiment. We went back to sleep, comforted by the sterile certainty of the equations. But when you strip away the authoritative tone of the press releases and stare directly at the underlying mechanics of this safety guarantee, the resulting existential dread is completely paralyzing. The absolute assurance that our planet will not be consumed by a manufactured singularity relies entirely on a sequence of theoretical assumptions that have never, ever been physically proven. Hawking radiation is a brilliant mathematical concept, a beautifully constructed bridge between differing realms of physics, but it has never been directly observed in a laboratory or measured in the depths of space. It is a purely theoretical mechanism. We are trusting our existence to an equation that exists only on a chalkboard, hoping with absolute desperation that the physical universe actually obeys the specific rules we have written for it. The horror goes infinitely deeper than just untested physics. The equations Stephen Hawking wrote were designed to describe massive, stellar black holes operating in our standard three-dimensional universe. If the Large Hadron Collider creates a micro-black hole, it will only do so because extra dimensions exist and gravity is forcefully bleeding into the bulk. This means the black hole we create would inherently be a higher dimensional entity. We are forced to rely on the theoretical evaporation rates of multidimensional singularities, which are governed by mathematics vastly more complex, incredibly chaotic, and vastly less understood than standard physics. What if the presence of rolled-up, higher dimensional geometries fundamentally alters the mechanism of Hawking radiation? What if the intense, localized gravity of a Calabi-Yau manifold prevents the thermal energy from radiating away? What if the multidimensional mathematics contains an error, a hidden variable, or a completely unforeseen geometric trap, and a higher dimensional black hole does not evaporate instantly, but instead stabilizes? We must violently confront the absolute, unforgiving finality of what happens if that single, unproven mathematical assumption turns out to be wrong. If a microscopic black hole is forged in the collision, and it fails to evaporate, it will not simply sit quietly in the vacuum tube, waiting to be studied. It will instantly drop through the floor of the detector, unhindered by electromagnetic forces, passing effortlessly through the solid rock of the Earth's crust. It will fall directly toward the gravitational center of the planet. It would come to rest at the core of the Earth, a microscopic, devouring speck of absolute, unyielding dark. And then it would begin to feed. It would not be a spectacular, cinematic explosion. It would be a silent, invisible parasite, a geometric cancer eating the planet from the inside out. It would consume a proton, then an iron atom, then a molecule. With every single piece of matter it swallows, its mass would increase, and its gravitational pull would grow stronger, pulling in surrounding matter faster and faster in an exponential, runaway curve of planetary consumption. The process might take years, or it might take centuries, but the end result is an absolute mathematical certainty. The Earth would be entirely hollowed out from the inside, collapsing into a hyperdense sphere of matter a few inches across, dragging humanity and everything we have ever built into the eternal, crushing dark of an artificial anomaly. This is the true, horrifying reality of the gamble we are taking every single time the subatomic beams are crossed. The scientific community is betting the entire sum of human history, the survival of our biosphere, and the structural integrity of our planet on an incomplete, untested mathematical framework. We are playing a game of cosmic Russian roulette, blindly spinning a cylinder filled with higher dimensional anomalies, absolutely convinced that the chamber is empty simply because our untested equations tell us it should be. We have elevated our own mathematical models to the status of infallible religious texts, exhibiting a level of terminal arrogance that borders on suicidal madness. We are systematically manufacturing the absolute apex predator of the cosmos in our basement, relying on nothing but the fragile, desperate hope that reality will act exactly the way we calculated, completely ignoring the terrifying fact that if we are wrong just once, there will be absolutely no one left to correct the math. We walk through our daily lives completely dependent on the profound, unquestioned assumption that the universe is a finished architectural project. We look out at the ancient, seemingly eternal stars. We observe the predictable, rhythmic orbits of the planets, and we deeply internalize the belief that the physical laws governing our existence are carved in absolute, indestructible stone. We believe that water will always freeze at 0 degrees, that gravity will always pull objects toward the center of mass, and that the intricate atomic bonds holding our DNA together will remain stable until the end of time. We assume that reality is a hardened, fully cured concrete foundation upon which the drama of human history is safely playing out. But the relentless, terrifying mathematics of modern particle physics points to a reality that completely shatters this comforting illusion. The universe is not a finished, stable construct. It is not resting on a solid foundation. It is precariously balanced on the edge of a catastrophic abyss, locked in a state of fragile, temporary equilibrium. And the machines we have built to study it might be the exact mechanism required to tip the entire cosmos over the edge. To comprehend the paralyzing vulnerability of our existence, we must examine the entity that serves as the absolute anchor of physical reality: the Higgs field. The Higgs field is an invisible, omnipresent energy field that permeates every single millimeter of the vacuum of space, stretching across the entire 14 billion light-year expanse of the observable universe. It is the mechanism that gives fundamental particles their mass. Without the constant, unyielding resistance provided by the Higgs field, the electrons in your body would have no mass, and they would instantly fly apart at the speed of light. The atoms comprising the Earth, the Sun, and the galaxies would completely disintegrate, and the solid, tangible reality we know would vaporize into a chaotic, formless storm of radiation. The Higgs field is the glue of existence. But in 2012, when the scientists at CERN finally forced the Higgs boson into existence and measured its mass, the resulting calculations revealed a mathematical truth so horrifying that it fundamentally altered our perception of cosmic safety. By combining the measured mass of the Higgs boson with the mass of the top quark, theoretical physicists mapped the energy potential of the vacuum itself. What they discovered was that the Higgs field is not resting at its lowest possible energy state. It is not sitting safely at the absolute bottom of the cosmic valley. Instead, the universe is resting in a temporary depression, a shallow divot perched high upon the side of a massive, energetic cliff. In the sterile language of physics, this precarious state is known as a false vacuum. The universe is metastable. It only appears stable because it lacks the necessary energy to push itself out of the shallow valley and plummet down into the true bottom. It has been stuck in this temporary, elevated state for the entirety of cosmic history. But there is a deeper, absolute valley, a true vacuum existing at a fundamentally lower energy state. The mathematics dictates that the universe desperately wants to reach that absolute bottom. It is constantly pulling, aching to drop into that lower, finalized state of existence. All it takes to push the universe over the edge is a localized spark of unimaginable, concentrated energy, or a random, microscopic event known as quantum tunneling. If even an infinitesimally small fraction of space, a region smaller than a single atom, manages to breach the energy barrier, and drop into the true vacuum, it initiates an apocalyptic phase transition. A microscopic bubble of true vacuum is born, and inside this bubble, the value of the Higgs field is radically, catastrophically different. Because the Higgs field dictates the mass of particles and the strength of the fundamental forces, the rules of physics inside this bubble are instantly rewritten. The masses of electrons and quarks change. The strong nuclear force that binds the nuclei of atoms fails. The electromagnetic bonds that hold physical matter together completely dissolve. Inside the true vacuum, our version of reality is physically impossible. Matter as we know it ceases to exist, instantly reduced to an incomprehensible, chaotic soup of unrecognizable, hostile energies. This microscopic bubble of cosmic death does not sit still. Driven by the massive energy difference between the false vacuum of our universe and the true vacuum inside the anomaly, the walls of the bubble violently expand outward in all directions. And the most terrifying aspect of this expansion is its velocity. The boundary of the true vacuum expands at exactly the speed of light. This introduces a level of paralyzing, existential horror that defies human comprehension. Because the bubble expands at the absolute cosmic speed limit, no information, no light, and no warning signal can ever precede its arrival. You cannot see it coming. If a bubble of true vacuum were triggered on the other side of the Milky Way, or even just perfectly outside our own solar system, the light carrying the visual image of the approaching destruction would arrive at the exact same fraction of a millisecond as the destruction itself. There is no early warning system. There is no alarm. There is no time to process fear, to look up at the sky, or to comprehend the end of the world. One absolute fraction of a second, you are sitting in a chair, breathing the air, existing as a complex biological organism, and in the next infinitely small sliver of time, the very concept of atoms is permanently deleted from your coordinates. The Earth, the Sun, the entire solar system, and eventually the entire galaxy would simply be wiped clean from the cosmic hard drive without a single sound. It is the ultimate, perfect eradication. It is the permanent deletion of the laws of physics that allow for the concept of life, consciousness, or memory to exist in any form. We must violently combine this existential vulnerability with the actions occurring deep beneath the Swiss-French border. The scientists operating the Large Hadron Collider are actively accelerating protons to unprecedented velocities and smashing them together, generating the most localized, hyper-concentrated points of kinetic trauma our planet has ever witnessed. They are deliberately attempting to access higher dimensions, to tear open the Calabi-Yau manifolds, and to force the subatomic geometry of the universe to yield to their engineering. By doing so, they are injecting massive, violent, concentrated energy directly into the very fabric of the Higgs field. They are swinging a subatomic sledgehammer inside a room built entirely of fragile glass, operating under the incredibly arrogant assumption that they know exactly how much force the glass can withstand before it shatters. The mathematics of vacuum decay becomes infinitely more complex and infinitely more dangerous when you introduce the existence of extra dimensions. If gravity is bleeding out into the bulk, and if curled-up dimensions are being forced to temporarily unfold, the energy barriers that keep the false vacuum stable might be structurally compromised by the sudden presence of these higher geometries. We assume the barrier keeping us in the false vacuum is thick enough to withstand our subterranean collisions. But what if the localized unfolding of a hidden dimension acts as the ultimate cosmic needle, What if by forcefully knocking on the doors of the dark bulk, we inadvertently puncture the incredibly fragile floor of the false vacuum? The energy required to trigger the phase transition might be drastically lowered by the presence of multidimensional anomalies. We could be providing the exact physical spark required to initiate the end of reality. The physics community routinely attempts to diffuse this terror by pointing to the cosmos. They assure us that cosmic rays hit the Earth's atmosphere every single day with energies far exceeding those produced by the LHC, and since the universe has not destroyed itself yet, our machine must be perfectly safe. But this argument relies on a dangerous, unproven equivalency. Cosmic ray collisions are scattered, unconfined, and fundamentally different from the highly controlled, repeating, hyper-concentrated, and perfectly head-on collisions generated inside the magnetic vice grip of a superconducting collider. The environment inside the LHC is artificial, designed specifically to maximize the density of the impact and to summon exotic, short-lived particles that do not normally manifest in the cold vacuum of space. Furthermore, if we are specifically tuning the collisions to resonate with higher dimensional frequencies to hunt for Kaluza-Klein particles, we are doing something the natural universe rarely does in such a sustained, isolated manner. We are betting the existence of the cosmos on the assumption that nature's naturally occurring, chaotic violence is identical to our artificially sustained, highly concentrated trauma. We are playing a game of cosmic Russian roulette with the foundational stability of the universe. The sheer, terminal hubris of humanity is laid bare in the design of this experiment. We have successfully mapped the precarious nature of our existence. We have looked at the terrifying mathematics of the false vacuum, and we have recognized that our universe is fundamentally rigged with an invisible tripwire. And our immediate institutional response is to build the largest machine in history to violently stomp on the floor directly next to the wire, simply to see if the mathematics is correct. We are risking the permanent deletion of reality, gambling with the absolute annihilation of the cosmos, completely blind to the fact that if we finally manage to trigger the vacuum decay, we will not even have the luxury of a fraction of a second to realize that we were wrong. We possess a profound, desperate psychological reliance on the concept of cosmic quarantine. When we look up into the freezing, pitch-black expanse of the night sky, we are inherently comforted by the staggering, incomprehensible vastness of the void. We measure the universe in light years, charting distances so impossibly huge that the human mind simply shuts down when attempting to truly visualize them. We look at the Andromeda galaxy, our closest galactic neighbor, and we know that it is 2.5 million light-years away. We look at the edge of the observable universe, and we see a boundary stretching out over 46 billion light-years in every direction. We use these colossal numbers as a psychological shield. We believe that distance is the ultimate armor. We assume that if there are other forces, other entities, or other catastrophic cosmic events occurring out there in the dark, we are safely insulated from them by an ocean of empty, dead space. We believe that we are alone, isolated, and fundamentally protected by the sheer, unyielding volume of a vacant universe. But the mathematics of higher dimensional geometry completely annihilates this comforting delusion. It replaces the vast, protective void with a claustrophobic, suffocating nightmare. The terrifying truth emerging from the equations of theoretical physics is that our universe is not an isolated island in an endless ocean. It is merely one page in an infinitely dense, tightly packed cosmic book, and the terrifying realities written on the other pages are resting right against our skin. To understand the sheer, paralyzing horror of this structural claustrophobia, we must fully accept the architectural consequences of Brane cosmology. As the mathematics of M-theory dictates, our entire three-dimensional universe is nothing more than a flat, infinitely thin membrane, a brane suspended within the vast, higher dimensional volume of the bulk. The particles that make up our bodies, our planets, and the photons of light that allow us to see are permanently glued to the surface of this membrane. But the unforgiving equations that govern this higher dimensional hyperspace do not dictate that our universe must be the only one. In fact, the mathematics strongly suggests the exact opposite. If the bulk is a massive multi-dimensional room, there is absolutely no mathematical or geometric reason why it should only contain a single sheet of paper. The physical laws of string theory perfectly allow, and in many models fundamentally require, the existence of multiple branes, other membranes, other entirely distinct three-dimensional universes floating within the exact same higher dimensional void. This is the scientific formalization of the parallel universe, but it is entirely stripped of the comforting, abstract distance usually associated with the multiverse. When we hear the term parallel universe, we intuitively imagine a reality that exists incredibly far away, or perhaps in some abstract, inaccessible mathematical state. We desperately want to believe that parallel realities are kept separate from ours by unfathomable distances. But in the framework of the bulk, the concept of distance is geometrically weaponized against us. Because these other universes exist in a higher spatial dimension, the separation between our universe and the next is not measured in billions of light years across three-dimensional space. The separation is measured across the fourth, fifth, or sixth spatial dimension, and the mathematics suggests that this separation might be unimaginably, terrifyingly small. Theoretical physics allows for another brane, an entirely separate, infinite three-dimensional universe, to be hovering directly next to ours across the higher dimension, separated by a gap of less than a single millimeter. Let that absolute, paralyzing reality sink in. Right now, as you are sitting in a room, breathing the air, and feeling the solid ground beneath your feet, there could be an entirely different universe resting a microscopic fraction of a millimeter away from your face. It is not billions of light years away. It is right on top of you. It is passing through the exact same three-dimensional coordinates that your body currently occupies, simply shifted infinitesimally into a geometric direction you cannot point to and cannot perceive. Because the photons of light are permanently trapped on their respective branes, light cannot cross the microscopic gap between the universes. The parallel brane is completely, utterly invisible. You cannot see it, you cannot touch it, and you cannot interact with it using any of the standard forces of nature. But it is there, an unimaginably massive, infinite cosmic structure, potentially filled with its own stars, its own galaxies, its own physical laws, and its own incomprehensible entities, is resting its entire crushing weight right against the invisible boundary of our reality. The psychological horror of this proximity is absolute. We are not isolated. We are not quarantined in a safe, empty void. We are packed into a microscopic, multi-dimensional trench, surrounded by massive, unseen architectures that are pressing directly against the geometric fabric of our existence. We are trapped in a dark, crowded room, entirely blind to the colossal entities breathing right next to our ears. The space around you is not empty, it is infinitely dense with other realities, stacked on top of each other like a deck of cards, separated by a mathematical wall so incredibly thin that it is fundamentally terrifying that it has managed to hold together for 14 billion years. We must violently confront the agonizing uncertainty of what actually exists on these adjacent branes. We arrogantly assume that a parallel universe would simply be a mirror image of our own, perhaps with slightly different historical outcomes or minor variations in physical constants. But the bulk does not care about our need for familiarity. The physical laws on an adjacent brane could be dictated by entirely different mathematical parameters. The speed of light could be different. The mass of the electron could be unrecognizable. The adjacent universe might not support the existence of stable atoms, existing instead as an infinite, churning ocean of chaotic, searing radiation. Or, even more terrifyingly, it could host a physical reality governed by laws that allow for the evolution of hyperdimensional structures and incomprehensible forces that make our universe look like a fragile, primitive toy. We have absolutely no idea who or what is sharing our exact coordinates in the bulk. We are sharing a microscopic bed with an unknown, unseen Leviathan. And this is where the actions taking place at the Large Hadron Collider cross the threshold from scientific curiosity into pure, unfiltered existential madness. We establish that while light and matter are glued to the brane, the force of gravity is not. Gravity is a closed string. It is the only force capable of leaving our universe, traversing the bulk, and interacting with whatever exists in the higher dimensions. This means that gravity is the only bridge across the microscopic gap. If there is a massive structure or a high-density event on an adjacent brane, we would not be able to see it, but we would be able to feel its gravitational pull bleeding across the divide. This is one of the leading theories for the existence of dark matter. The terrifying possibility that the invisible mass pulling our galaxies apart is actually the gravitational shadow of massive objects resting on a parallel universe, floating a millimeter away from our own. But the bridge goes both ways. When the scientists at CERN accelerate protons to the absolute edge of the speed of light and violently smash them together, they are intentionally generating unprecedented, hyper-concentrated spikes of gravitational energy. They are actively trying to force gravitons out into the bulk. They are attempting to manufacture micro-black holes, which inherently warp the higher dimensional space around them. What we are doing, in the most literal, physical sense imaginable, is violently banging on the wall of our universe. We are sending localized, massive gravitational shock waves across the microscopic gap separating our brane from the others. We are standing in a pitch-black, infinitely crowded room, completely blind to who or what is standing right next to us, and we are deliberately, repeatedly pounding on the floor simply to see if it makes a sound. We operate under the terminal, suicidal assumption that the adjacent branes are empty or that the mathematical wall separating us is an impenetrable, indestructible barrier. We assume that our violent subatomic collisions are isolated events, contained safely within our own reality. But if gravity can cross the gap, then our violence is not contained. We are actively bleeding our chaotic energy into the adjacent realities. We are knocking on a dimensional door, completely oblivious to the catastrophic consequences of our actions. What happens if the hyperconcentrated gravitational spike from a CERN collision accidentally destabilizes the delicate mathematical balance of the adjacent brane? What happens if our blind, ignorant pounding causes a localized collapse in the millimeter gap separating the universes, forcing two infinite branes to physically touch? The resulting collision of universes would instantly obliterate the laws of physics, permanently deleting both realities in an incomprehensible apocalypse of higher dimensional fire. The comforting illusion of cosmic isolation has been mathematically eradicated. We are not alone, we are not safe, and we are not insulated by the vastness of space. We are microscopic insects trapped on a fragile membrane, hovering a fraction of a millimeter away from unimaginable, unfeeling realities. And instead of remaining quiet, instead of trying to hide in the dark, we have built the largest machine in human history to repeatedly, violently scream our coordinates into the void. We are blindly smashing our fists against an invisible mathematical wall, absolutely terrified of what we might do to ourselves if something vast, incomprehensible, and infinitely more powerful on the other side finally decides to knock back. We view scientific progress as a noble, inevitable march toward enlightenment. We tell ourselves that human curiosity is a fundamental virtue, a biological imperative that elevates us above the chaotic, unthinking animals we evolved from. But at the extreme, bleeding edges of human knowledge, this relentless drive to understand ceases to be a virtue. It morphs into a profound, suicidal pathology. When faced with the terrifying, incomprehensible boundaries of our reality, the bleeding anomalies of gravity, the lurking heavy ghosts of higher dimensions, the suffocating proximity of parallel universes, and the paralyzing fragility of the false vacuum, a rational species would pause. A sane, self-preserving civilization would look at the catastrophic mathematical possibilities, recognize the immense, unquantifiable existential risk, and make the conscious decision to step back from the abyss. But humanity does not possess that specific survival instinct. Our response to the terrifying silence of the unknown is not caution. It is an immediate, aggressive, and violent escalation. We do not stop. We do not turn off the machines. When the Large Hadron Collider failed to find the universe-shattering physics it was built to discover in its initial runs, the scientific establishment did not conclude that the physics were absent. They simply concluded that they were not hitting the fabric of reality hard enough. Right now, deep beneath the bedrock of the European continent, the colossal architecture of CERN is undergoing a massive, aggressive transformation. They are not decommissioning the 27-kilometer subterranean battering ram, they are sharpening it. They are currently executing a massive overhaul known as the High-Luminosity upgrade. In the sterile, carefully curated language of public relations and scientific press releases, the word luminosity sounds like a gentle, illuminating concept, a brilliant and peaceful shedding of light into the dark, unseen corners of the subatomic world. But in the violent, uncompromising lexicon of particle physics, luminosity is a metric of pure, concentrated destruction. It is the absolute measure of how many particles are violently packed into a specific space at a specific microscopic moment in time. It is a measurement of the sheer, uncompromising density of the collision. The upgrade is not just about making the superconducting magnets colder or the protons move faster. It is about exponentially increasing the sheer, overwhelming volume of the subatomic wreckage. When the high-luminosity Large Hadron Collider becomes fully operational, it will multiply the number of proton collisions by a staggering, incomprehensible factor. The machine will be generating billions of hyper-concentrated, primordial fireballs every single second, day after day, month after month, for years on end. They are artificially engineering an environment of sustained, relentless, subatomic trauma that simply does not exist anywhere else in the natural universe outside the immediate, crushing vicinity of a collapsing star. And the reason for this massive escalation is deeply unsettling. The anomalies they are hunting, the missing energy of the graviton escaping into the bulk, the microscopic black holes, the terrifying shadows of Kaluza-Klein particles are mathematically predicted to be exceptionally rare. They do not happen every time protons crash together. They are incredibly faint glitches, hiding deep within an overwhelming ocean of chaotic, blinding digital data. To find them, physicists believe they must completely overwhelm the probability curve. They must roll the cosmic dice so many billions of times that the impossible is mathematically, forcefully coerced into finally manifesting. But this aggressive strategy of brute force statistical extraction entirely ignores the paralyzing, existential horror of the law of large numbers. We have already established that every single time two protons violently annihilate each other at these unprecedented energies, we are aggressively testing the structural integrity of our dimensional prison. We are creating localized pockets of extreme, higher dimensional gravity that could theoretically pinch off into microscopic singularities. We are violently plucking the fundamental geometric strings of reality, desperately hoping they do not resonate with the heavy, unstable harmonics of a higher, destructive dimension. We are actively striking the incredibly fragile, precarious glass floor of the false vacuum, trusting blindly that our individual, localized impacts are not quite forceful enough to shatter it. If the chance of accidentally triggering a false vacuum decay or creating a stable, devouring micro-black hole or forcefully unfolding a hidden Calabi-Yau manifold is 1 in a trillion, we comfort ourselves with that statistical rarity. But when you actively upgrade your machine to purposefully generate billions of collisions every single second, a 1 in a trillion chance ceases to be a comforting safety margin. It ceases to be an impossibility. It becomes a looming, unyielding mathematical inevitability. We are no longer just poking blindly in the dark. We are actively, aggressively trying to break the door down. Imagine standing in an unfamiliar, pitch-black house. You know mathematically that the walls around you are incredibly thin, and your own equations strongly suspect that there are vast, incomprehensible things moving in the unseen rooms adjacent to yours. You do not know if those things are benign, unfeeling forces of geometric nature, or if they are hostile, devouring hyperdimensional entities. A single, tentative knock on the wall might go unnoticed. It might simply echo into the dark and fade away into the void. But what we are doing with the high-luminosity upgrade is walking right up to that incredibly thin, invisible mathematical wall, pressing our faces directly against the plaster and unleashing a frantic, deafening, continuous barrage of violent blows. We are pounding on the dimensional barrier billions of times a second, flooding the quiet, unlit volume of the bulk with the chaotic, screaming vibrations of our microscopic violence. And we are executing this violent escalation without possessing the slightest geometric comprehension of how to undo the damage if the wall actually gives way. We are entirely consumed by the arrogance of the trigger, completely ignoring our absolute inability to control the bullet. If the dimensional fabric tears and a higher geometry bleeds into ours, we do not have a mathematical stitch to sew it back together. If a microscopic bubble of true vacuum is sparked in the blazing center of the collision chamber, we cannot build a containment field to stop it from expanding outward at the exact speed of light. If a hyperdimensional singularity drops through the floor of the Atlas detector and begins to feed, we do not possess a single physical mechanism on this planet to slow its descent into the core of the Earth. We have mastered the art of breaking the universe, but we are absolutely, terrifyingly illiterate when it comes to putting it back together. We have handed the keys to our existence over to a process of brute force statistical manipulation, violently shaking the very foundation of reality until the loose change of higher dimensional physics finally falls out of its pockets. We justify this terminal hubris by claiming that it is our ultimate destiny to understand the cosmos, that the pursuit of knowledge is the highest, most noble calling of our species, and that we must push the boundaries of physics no matter the cost. But there is a distinct, undeniable point where curiosity ceases to be a virtue and becomes a fatal, species-ending compulsion. We are a microscopic, fragile, low-energy byproduct of a 14-billion-year-old explosion, trapped on a thin, sticky membrane, floating in a terrifying, unlit void. We are utterly blind to the true volume of existence, surrounded by bleeding gravitational anomalies, catastrophic energy potentials, and the looming, invisible shadows of parallel structures resting a microscopic fraction of a millimeter against our skin. The cosmic silence that surrounds us in the vastness of space might not be the quiet of an empty room. It might be the deliberate, cautious silence of a reality that knows infinitely better than to make unnecessary noise in the dark. By upgrading the Large Hadron Collider, by exponentially increasing the sheer density and frequency of our subatomic violence, we are making a definitive, irrevocable choice on behalf of every living organism on this planet. We are aggressively refusing to respect the boundaries of our three-dimensional prison. We are aggressively rejecting the comforting, protective safety of our own ignorance. We are hitting the wall harder, faster, and with more sustained, unyielding violence than ever before in the history of our world. We are blindly, frantically knocking on a dimensional door, desperate for a response, entirely consumed by the thrill of the interrogation, yet completely and utterly unequipped for the paralyzing, existential horror of what will happen to us if something on the other side finally decides to open it. Good night, and I will see you in the next video.